Hi, welcome to my sewing studio. I'm Mimi, and in this video I'm going to show you how I like to do a bias bound neckline. It's also good for tank tops and the armholes of the tank tops or anywhere there's a curve where you want a clean finish. I've heard it being called the French method. I'm not sure. Let me know if you know the actual technical name for it, but it's basically um, the bias is on the inside. You stitch it and you iron it to the inside, so you see the stitching on the outside, but the bias is all on the inside. Um, for when you just don't want there to be the binding look. Sometimes you do want that kind of look, but sometimes you just want it to look clean. All right, let's get started. Oh, before we get started, I just wanted to say thanks to all the new subscribers. You're inspiring me to get some more sewing content out there to you. I'm glad that you're finding the videos helpful, and I'm inspired to share more of what I do. So if you haven't already, subscribe, like, comment. Look forward to seeing you here some more. Okay, so I cut a mock-up neckline for this tutorial, and I went ahead and cut the bias. I like to use 1 inch plus 1/8 of an inch. I find that I like that width on the neckline because you end up with about 3/8 of an inch from the edge to the stitches, and I've experimented with skinnier, and that is a little tricky because you want to have enough to fold under. So you don't want to go too skinny, but you also don't want to get too wide because I don't know, I guess you could if you want that look, but I don't know. I find that the 3/8 inch works for me. So experiment with different widths. So let's start sewing. You want to start sewing the shoulders first. I like to start from the neck out and the neck out because you always want to account for stretching, and I think it's better to trim off excess at the shoulder than at the neck. So I'm always thinking about that when I'm sewing, like, oh, because everything's not going to go perfectly all the time, and you want to like allow for that room for a mistake. Okay. I went ahead and overlocked the shoulder seams. Of course, you can always zigzag or do one of the special stitches at the edges, but just finish them before you apply the bias. You always want to iron the shoulders before you start the bias because you're just going to get a more professional look, and you want that seam to be flat. Okay, so this is a little thing that I do after I iron. I match up the shoulder seams, and on the back part, oh, my iron's going crazy. I think that's the back neck. Yeah. You want to line this up, and this becomes your center back. And I just like to make a little mark. Since I'm already at the iron, you can just know exactly where that center back line is. See? Okay, so at the sewing machine, you have your bias with you. You want to look on the outside of the garment. See, this is the inside. And you want to go to the back, that little mark that you made with the iron, the center back. And then you want to take the bias, and you want the edge of the bias to be, you have a 1/2 inch. See? This is the center back, and I'm moving the edge of the bias a 1/2 inch past the center back. You line up these two edges, the neckline and the bias. And I like to sew 1/4 inch. This foot, my foot is about a 1/4 inch, so that's what I aim for. And there's also a 1/4 inch line here. But I've experimented with sewing different widths this way, and 1/4 inch seems to work well because it's not too bulky, but then it's also not so thin where it's gonna pop out. You start right at that center stitch, and I don't backstitch yet. And as you're sewing, you're kind of easing this in. See how this is the curve, you want to kind of pull the bias just slightly, not like totally tug at it, but it's the motion that I'm always thinking about when I'm sewing this kind of finish is I'm always kind of scrunching this just a tad bit, and I'm always kind of pulling this a little bit. It's a very subtle movement, but it'll help you get that nice, I don't know what the word for it is, but you just don't, sometimes you do bias and this is too loose and you kind of get a messy neckline. It's not like so sharp. So that's just a little thing that I do. And it's very subtle. You don't want to overdo it. But see how I'm kind of easing that curve and then stretching the bias. Okay, when you're almost at the edge, I like to cut it off. Oh, where are my scissors? Of course, they're behind me. Okay, clippers. It's hard with this tripod here. Okay, so here, remember we stopped right at or overlapped a 1/2 inch right here, so this is the center back. And here you would just want to line it up like this and trim. And then I sew that. About 1/2 inch seam allowance. Be sure not to sew the actual shirt. So just a little bit over. Okay. So then, you see, now you can finish that. And the reason I do that is because I've tried cutting the bias like exactly the length that I think that it should be. And because this is curved and then the bias is stretchy, that it's never exactly the same. So this way, you know that it's the same. It matches, the bias matches the neckline. And I've done it a different way a lot just so I could just see what best works for me. And this is what best works for me. Because bias is always stretchy. It's always impossible to get exact. And so you want to just from where you stop stitching, here, back stitch. And you want to separate this. You want to open that seam allowance so it's not as bulky. Okay, so now it's all in there. And one check, because this has happened to me before, is I look at the neck and I make sure that there is a good amount like a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the other side, because sometimes what happens is that I missed this edge and it's like so close to the stitches that after a few washings I bet it'll pop out. So if you do see something that's like not, that's too close to the edge, then you want to just go over and sew it. Go back and just stitch a little bit more. It's not going to make a huge difference on the neckline. You won't even notice it. But while you're here, you want to do that because it's a pain when you discover it later. So yeah, so I'm good with this amount of seam allowance all around the neck. And now we go to the iron again. Okay, so now you want to iron this seam out right here. What we're aiming for is the seam allowance to go towards the bias all around. Okay, so this part's kind of optional. I don't know if I guess if you're in a huge hurry, you can skip this stitch part, but I always think about the clothing lasting after washings. I'd never want it to pop out. And since this is so skinny and I would like to get this really flat, I just think that the extra top stitching here all around just gives it a little bit more of a finished look. It's totally up to you. I think that it would also wear better once you wash it, because a lot of times if it's the seam's not stitched down after you wash, it kind of gets wonky. So I like to do this extra step. You want to make sure that the seam allowance is towards the bias, and you just are basically top stitching on top of that and the bias. About 1/8 of an inch in from that seam. Okay, I don't know if you can see this. I probably should have done this in a different stitch color. Oh well. But see, you just get a little extra. Okay, so now it's the final, well, second to final step besides ironing. You want to make sure that the inside is up, the inside of the garment, and start in the center back. You can iron this mark if this is all around first, if that makes it easier for you, but I felt like that's just an extra step because I have to iron it after I sew anyway. So, and you have this nice flat seam already, and you already stitched it down. So after that, you just flip your garment over. I always like to start in the center back, so you don't have like the back stitches like in the front. So fold it. It's going to be about 3/8 of an inch, but it really depends on the type of fabric you have and how much the bias stretches. But it's around 3/8 of an inch from the edge to the stitches. And here, as you're stitching, you can go really slow, but you just want to make sure that it's laying flat and about the same width. Like, you don't want it to be super skinny here and super wide. Just try to be consistent. The bias is really forgiving, so it shouldn't be that difficult. You want to make sure that that seam here is on the inside, not on the outside. And see where you're going over kind of more of a severe curve. You just want to make sure that that's laying flat. Like you don't want to accidentally sew a little pucker in, but just go slowly and just make it even. It will turn out flat. No worries. You don't want to fold too much. See, I'm going to just make it even as possible. Okay, so this is the last stretch. And so just again, see how there's a little bit of puckering here? Don't fret. Just make it even with your hands. Okay. Get these guys out of the way. Here it is, and now we're just gonna go to the iron. Here is the finished neckline. I hope you try this and have success. Remember to subscribe and like and comment. What other tutorials do you want to see?